So I'm in the bucket of Florida State got completely screwed. Mark, and he hasn't elaborated really, is in the bucket of Florida State did not get screwed. I'm of the opinion best you can do is go undefeated in a Power 5 conference. And I think that Florida State did that. I think they beat convincingly some good opponents. And I think that Alabama just snuck away in because you need to have an SEC team in. I'm pretty conflicted on this. Mark, I'd like to give you the floor for a moment to tell me why I shouldn't feel like Florida State got screwed.
Yeah, let me swing you. Let me swing you to this side. And this, in my opinion, is the logical side. It's not necessarily the right thing, but it's the thing that needed to happen. And I think at the end of the day, when you look at what the committee is trying to do, and they're trying to put the four best teams, the four teams that actually have a chance of competing and winning the national championship, right? You want to get those four top teams in. And I think somehow, some way they actually did that. Now, I will lead off and say that we predicted chaos and that somebody was going to get screwed, and we were right. People got screwed. You could even make the argument that Georgia got more screwed than Florida State.
I'd argue, I would 100% argue that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because they were number one going into championship weekend, and again, you get punished for competing for a conference championship when teams like Ohio State sit at home with that one loss, and there's always a chance one of those teams slides back in after not competing for a national championship. The committee's not been consistent how they've done this in the 14 playoff the last few years. If you're a Florida State fan, I completely understand the frustration. At the end of the day, I'll ask you this question, John. Does Florida State do what they did, 13-0, win a national championship, if Jordan Travis is not on their roster?
I don't know, man. And you mentioned his name. Like, he literally said he wished he broke his leg earlier so that Florida
I don't
State
know if he does wish that
prove.
because they would not have. I don't think they would have finished undefeated had he broke his leg earlier.
I don't know, man. I mean, he's a stud 100%, but I think the team around him is really freaking good and balanced too. And so I don't want to credit all of Florida State's success to his level of play in its entirety. Now, with that being said, I look at this board. I don't see them beating Bama. I don't see them beating Michigan. Maybe Washington, maybe Texas. That's how I look at this board right now.
Without Jordan Travis, I think each of these teams wins by 2 scores or more against Florida State right now. And that's, I think, what the committee probably looked at. It's tough to say because you never know, right? Like maybe they're just a really good defensive team, and maybe they fill the holes of missing out Jordan Travis. Maybe they fill that in other ways, and maybe they just play a really good football game and they're really well coached and they steal a game from one of these teams, right? Because you never know, and that's the argument that these Florida State fans and people that are upset about it are making, and that's a fair argument. But if you look at the eye test, and I hate the word eye test because it's so biased, right? It's always an opinion. The fact is
right.
the fact. They were 13-0. They won the ACC, and they played two SEC opponents and won both of those games, right? So like that's the argument. But they are such a different team without Jordan Travis. And make no ifs about it. If Jordan Travis were playing, they'd be in this, and they'd probably be the 2 seed. So
Right.
that's the thing, though. They're not the same team without that guy. Any of these four teams that got in, you take Quinn Ewers out, you take Michael Penix out, you take Milrow out, or you take JJ out. Those teams aren't the same teams either, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think Washington gets in, even if let's say Washington won, but Penix tore his ACL in that game.
You don't
I
think
don't think they would.
Washington's
I
in
don't
this
think
bracket?
Washington gets in. I think you see Georgia in or Florida State in instead, right?
Yeah.
Same
And
goes for
I think
Milrow.
that's fair. And I think Georgia got screwed too because they're getting punished, like you said, for playing inside of a conference championship game, losing to a very, very good team in crunch time. Um, and so it's tough. Now, I have slightly less sympathy for Georgia because they controlled their own destiny and they lost, right? So it's tough. I don't get me wrong. I think the quarterback aspect of it is 100% a massive factor in the decision making process. And I guess the part that pisses me off is the fact that this is up to the opinions of the committee and conjecture, and there's a bunch of nuance at play because that's not how the NFL works, right? It's records and that's it. It doesn't matter if every single person playing for the Eagles died the next day. If they finished the season, with a playoff record,
Yeah.
they would get a playoff they would get a playoff spot. But it's not at all how this 4-team playoff bracket in college has worked, and it is frustrating. It stinks. I
I
think
will
so.
say, John, that you got to be careful with the NFL playoff comparison because the NFL talent drop off is nowhere near college.
And
All
that's
those,
that's very
if you're in
true.
the NFL, you're in the NFL. You are one of the very best. Even if you're a practice squad player, you're still a very good football player, and you're ready to play in games. They're like,
Right.
obviously, you're not as good as the starter, but like, it's not the drop off. You're seeing Jake, you're seeing Browning and some of these backup quarterbacks win games. Why?
Right.
Because they're still really good football players that just you think are bad because they're bench riders in the NFL. But if like, Florida State's backup is a huge drop off from a guy like Jordan Travis who's gonna play on Sundays. Like that is
Right.
a very big different thing that and that's not a fair comparison. People keep saying, well, what if the NFL did that? What if the NFL just decided to put the Bills in, even though because nobody wants to watch the Steelers play a playoff game? Like that's not how it works in the NFL because it's more competitive and the talent equals out better and the coaches equal out better. But in college, man, you take a team's best player, a Heisman candidate, off their roster, and it does change what they're capable of doing in a big way. And I just think, the average point, I think Kirk Herbstreit has said the same thing. He's had the same voice as me through this entire process, right? Get the four best in right now. Who are the four best right now? Get those
Yep.
teams in. That's what it should be. I think the committee did that. And obviously, they left some good football teams out in order to do that. And it sucks because the expanded playoff should already be a thing. We've been saying that since before this happened. We called it 2 weeks ago when we said we can't wait for this to happen. And the committee's going to take a bunch of shit because that's exactly what they should be getting is a bunch of shit, right? Because they created this problem.
Right.
But I do think they got it right. And I will say the biggest winner of this weekend, Texas,
100%.
because Texas was not, in my opinion, not going to get in, right, without Alabama winning. Not only did they get in,
Totally.
but they got the 3 seed, and they got a more favorable matchup because of what happened with Michigan going
Dude,
to 1.
and I'll say this much, like I just have to be honest with myself. The concept of Nick Saban having a month to put together a defensive game plan is absolutely terrifying.
It's very
Like
scary.
I that is scary as shit. Like,
Nick Saban has not lost many college football playoff games. He hasn't lost many college football games at Bama to begin with, but he
right.
hasn't lost many playoff games. And Michigan, they pride themselves on pushing people around and being more physical, and they have been more physical than everybody they played this year, but they haven't played an SEC opponent like this. And, I mean, you saw Michigan's reaction when they saw who they got paired with to play in this game. It didn't look exactly like they were feeling great about it. You know what I mean? I
I
think
mean,
because
I think that video is a little bit overblown, but I do think this, right? Like if I was a Michigan player, I would definitely not be as stoked about Bama as I would be Washington or Texas. I frankly think
or Florida State.
yeah, you could manhandle any of those teams, frankly. And I think Bama, I mean, and you're right. And that is me casually admitting the fact that this committee has put in the 4 best teams because I wouldn't flinch at basically anybody except Bama or Georgia. I think those are maybe the only 2 teams in all of college football that have a legitimate chance to beat Michigan. And even then, right, all of that is to also suggest, though, that as long as Michigan comes out and has the same run game and the same defense that they did against Ohio State, I do think they win this game against Bama. But Bama gives me more pause than basically any other matchup that you could possibly put together. So,
It is a lot easier to say they'll be able to run the ball and do that stuff against Bama than it is to actually do it, right? And like you said, John, a month of Nick Saban and
scary.
I mean, those guys are going to be prepared to play, right? And
Yeah.
Michigan's offense, if we're being honest, isn't the most complex offense in the world. They win because they're more physical and they're better up front and they have a good quarterback and 2 really good running backs. That's how they win games, right? The scheme isn't going to confuse Nick Saban. He's going to have that figured out.
Right.
So I will say I think the winner of that game wins the national championship game by a pretty good margin. Like I think we're going to see
Yeah.
the national championship is being played in that 1-4 game. Like that, in my opinion, the winner of that is
Is going to
probably
be
going to be a
yeah.
7 or more point favorite in the next game.
I'd also like not to put a ton of weight on a guard, but I think Zinter being
It's a
gone
big,
definitely
big
is a
loss.
huge loss because he's I mean, I would argue he probably would be the first interior offensive lineman taken in the draft this coming year. And now, you don't know what's going to happen with him. I think he does have an extra year of eligibility if he wants to stay. I don't know if that's going to work out, right? Depends on, how much he assumes his draft stock is going to plummet with this injury. Um, Either way, I'm pumped about it. Going to be able to watch this game with my dad, which I'm excited about because we're states away right now, and he's a huge Michigan fan. We didn't get to watch Ohio State together, so that'll be a good time. But yeah, man, I'm excited for it, and also I think a lot of Big Ten fans have at least like one SEC team that they bandwagon. Now that I'm a resident of Austin, I gotta say I've watched way more Texas football than I have in my entire life, and I think that I finally can declare that I'm bandwagoning an SEC team in Texas. So go
Hook
Longhorns,
'em, dude.
hook 'em,
Hook 'em.
hook 'em,
Hey,
baby,
Texas being back is great for college football, in my opinion.
100%.
Seeing McConaughey walk around with that poise, flashing the horns, like there's something about
Hook
Texas
'em.
being back that makes college football better. And they're, about as back as you can get. I mean, because I think they are favored to beat Washington. I do think that they will beat Washington. And
Mm-hmm.
Texas already beat Bama in Tuscaloosa this year. Like
Right.
Texas is in my opinion, the sleeper of this college football playoff because I don't think a lot of people are giving, Washington a chance, and that's reasonable. I think they're probably the worst of the four, even though they're the 2 seed. But Texas is a dangerous team who the winner of this Michigan Bama game is probably
Yeah.
going to see, and again, I still think the winner of that game, one versus four, wins it, but Texas being back makes things interesting, and they have playmakers, and Sark is a good coach who knows Saban well and already exposed him earlier this year.
Right.
Now beating Saban twice in the same year, not many people have done.
Right.
Especially as former coaches, former assistants. So, but this is what you wanted. You got four really good football teams. I think they'll be competitive games, and if Florida State were to be in, I think that would not have been the case, even though that might have been feel like the right thing to do, and that would have pissed off the least amount of people. I think they actually went against the grain here and did the right thing and got the four best in. You could argue Georgia's better than Washington or Texas, but you know,
Again, controlled their own destiny and lost, and I think that's what matters. And yeah, and not only do I agree with you that Texas is a legit team, I think that honestly that Oklahoma game that they did lose was incredibly fluky. I don't know if you watched that one, but it was turnover city on both teams. Just neither team really got in a rhythm.
rivalry games are weird, man. I mean,
They
You
get
saw
wagged.
Alabama almost, they needed a prayer on 4th and 31 to beat Auburn, and Auburn's
Right.
no good this year. But the very next week, like literally 7 days later, they beat the number one team in the country.
Yep.
So college football is weird. Rivalry game. Same with Washington. Washington had a close game with Washington State, who's not very
Right.
good this year. And then they come out and they beat Oregon a second time. You know how hard it is to beat the same team twice,
Right.
right? That is a hard thing to do. They were 10-point underdogs against Oregon in
Yeah.
that Pac-12 title game, and they took care of business. They established the run. Penix looks really, really good. Does your Heisman opinion change after this weekend? Because the finalists were announced. I still think it's pretty solid, Jaden Daniels, just in terms of what he's put up numbers
I
wise.
mean, yeah, because like all what was it? It's Daniels, Harrison,
Nix.
Nix, and who's the fourth one?
Penix, I think.
Okay, so what is that? 3 out of 4 guys are not making an appearance in the playoffs, so winningness is not being used as the primary criteria. Then, and if that's the case, then I think it's got to go to Daniels, right? Like, is that fair
I think
logic?
it's got to be. I think Daniels has been the best player of the country, and I don't think it's been
Yeah,
really close.
yeah.
You
If
know,
that's the criteria
I,
we're grading it on, then 100% it's
and
got to
and
be
in our
him.
last episode, we went through his numbers and we compared them. And there's not many guys. I mean, I can share a stat with you right now, John, that I I sent it to you on Twitter with about Jaden Daniels and why I think it's so big. The only quarterbacks in the SEC to record for 50 or more touchdowns, right? Let me just read you this list, okay, in SEC history. Bryce Young, number one overall draft pick, Heisman winner. Cam Newton, number one overall draft pick, Heisman winner. Tim Tebow, probably one of the best college football players of all time. Joe Burrow, Heisman winner, number one draft pick, and Jaden Daniels.
He's in
So
good company.
That's pretty good company in the SEC. And then if you look at his completion percentage and yards and points accounted for, that's all upwards of the best we've ever seen with Joe Burrow's record-breaking season at LSU. So I think you have to give it to him. You can't fault him for his defense being shitty, right? Like 3 losses in the SEC, and just a record-breaking year for him individually. Nobody else really. Penix, you can make the argument, right? He's had some Heisman moments for sure. Beating Knicks again was definitely one of them.